Hello, everybody, and welcome to an edition of the Commissioner Chronicles on the DLF YouTube channel. I am Nathan Powell, your host. I am a commissioner with all sorts of fun, different league ideas, different league settings, and I do it on the DLF YouTube channel and talk about it. And today, I am joined by the one and only Ryan McDowell. I text Ryan about league stuff all the time, but I had an idea for this channel and for this idea for this series that it's like a retrospective. So Ryan has commissioned many leagues. He still commissions many leagues that still exist, but there are a few along the line that have gotten dropped off, whether it be for the league getting stale because of owners or things different happening. But there's two of the leagues that I participated in that didn't really end for any of those reasons, but more so for concept reasons. And so I wanted to dig into both of them with Ryan, basically talk about the mistakes that were made, things that went well, things that went poorly, and if we were to redo these leagues in 2022, how things would be changed. So the first one we're going to talk about today is the Boys to Men Dynasty League. And for obviously like 99% of you are like, what on earth is a Boys to Men Dynasty League? Most of Ryan's Dynasty Leagues that occur happen by Ryan has a league idea and he tweets out, hey, would this be cool? And then 400 people are like, yes, that's a very cool idea. And so that's what happened with Boys to Men. Boys to Men, Ryan tweeted like, wouldn't it be cool if it was a league of half the league was young versus half the league was old, thus the name Boys to Men. And so Ryan, can you kind of talk about your thought process other than, I feel like in 2014 when this league was formed, height Twitter was a huge thing, and then age versus youth and all those things was a huge debate as well. So what were your thought process when you were initially putting together this league?
Yeah, this is. I'm glad you invited me to do this. It's definitely brought back some good memories of this specific league, of really just how Twitter was, how fantasy Twitter was, because it was definitely very different 8 years ago, back in 2014. So this was, first of all, I also feel like for our audience, we might even need to explain who Boys to Men actually are. That's an old R&B group. The name fit perfectly for the league concept, but onto the Dynasty stuff. Yeah. So in 2014, that was basically around the time that I had written the Productive Struggle article. And of course, a big piece of productive struggle strategy when you're building a dynasty team is to build around youth. And obviously that's how I built my teams then. It's still how I build my teams now. Nathan, I think for the most part, you would agree with me on most of those points of strategy. But there are many people, and there certainly were then, that thought that was foolish. Play to win now. Always play to win. Get the veterans that you can be confident in, that we've seen production from, and obviously that has some merit as well. And ultimately, there was so much talk and discussion on Twitter about that. Decided to really put it to the test. We formed a 12-team league and 14 team. Thank you. 14-team league, and so half the league, as you said, we're on that younger side, half were on the older side, and that basically meant you could only roster players that fit in your age category. And if you were on that younger side, once the player aged out, they became available to the veteran teams, which was certainly an interesting wrinkle as well.
Yeah, I think that the most interesting part of this format was the youth versus old rookie draft, where in the rookie auction for the 2 or 3 years that this league existed, half the league was bidding on rookies, bidding on, the DeAndre Hopkins of the world and guys like that. And then the other half was bidding on AJ Green and Des Bryant as, turning 27, 28-year-olds.
Yeah, exactly. Of course, we still had to have something for the other half of the league to do. They couldn't roster or even be in contention to try to get one of the rookies because of those age restrictions. But it made perfect sense that as the veterans aged off, they became part of the rookie draft. So you might see, or we actually did auctions in that league. But as you said, it might be Des Bryant or Drew Brees or whoever was moving from one side to the other. Half the league was going for those guys, while half was going for that terrible rookie class of 2015.
And if memory serves, I think this was one of the more contentious, like pre-startup, like putting the rules together that I've ever experienced. Because for the most part, like a commissioner has an idea, a commissioner puts together, and it happens. But because this was such a unique format, you were crowdsourcing. You were asking for the opinions of the people in the league. Like, what should we do? What should be the age? The key part of this league was half the league had a player under a specific age, half the league had a player over a specific age. So determining those age markers was a huge first part before you could obviously even do the startup auction. And we'll get into like our mistakes there. But what was your thought process early on, and how do you think we reached the point that we did?
Well, that's actually one thing that I try to do in all of my leagues. Especially if there's something unique like this where it's not it's not a cookie cutter league concept that everybody kind of assumes is going to be a certain way. I mean, the kitchen sink leagues, I think we've talked about those on here as well. Those had a lot of different wrinkles. This Boys to Men league had as well. And so if I can get the input from the other managers in the league, I think that's only going for a better league and a better experience for everybody. So I try to do that if needed, really in every league that I start. But in this one, you're right. It was contentious, and obviously on each side of the aisle, we were fighting for our best interest, but I think also pushing for what made sense, what was fair. I think we started, and obviously this was a terrible idea, but the original idea was there's one set age and you're on either side of that. And of course we realized that quarterbacks are around a lot longer than other players. Tight ends usually, might last longer, and running backs have a shorter shelf life. So we quickly got to the point where we needed different ages based on the different positions. That was a good first step that made sense for everyone. And then we just kind of started looking at some of the data, most importantly, the age of the top 12 and top 24 finishers at each position over I forgot how far we looked back. Maybe it was 3 years or 5 years. And we'll get to some of what we came up with, but I think it's really going to be shocking to our listeners here.
Yeah, so I guess let's get right into it. So the ages we did, and like I said, we'll talk about the mistakes we made here, but the ages we did were 27 and a half for the quarterback and tight end position. That was when the players would go from, the rookie side or the boys side into the men's side into that, rookie option per se. And then running back, wide receiver was at the age of 27 years old. And I'll start off by saying when we were like negotiating essentially these ages, and Ryan and I both were on the boys side, the points I was making towards like, the age probably getting to around this number was like, hey, the boys, they're taking a risk. They don't know if these NFL players are quote unquote good or not. They don't know if they're going to be fantasy contributors. So there should be like years added on to account for, those busts. Whereas especially in 2014, it seemed like veterans busted a lot less often than they do now.
Yeah. And I think that was kind of one of the common criticisms of building around a young team in general in this league or in any league is you're going to have busts. You're going to have rookie busts that you either used early draft picks on or used a large percentage of your budget if we're talking about auction as we were here. And just that uncertainty of how a player will really perform was a big drawback for many dynasty players at that point, investing in those rookies, those young players in general. I mean, now again, we're talking 8 years ago. Now it's very common to see rookies being drafted early and often, and a lot of those concepts that we looked at then and that were kind of not rare but new, I guess you could say, are commonplace now.
So from your recollection, what went wrong? Why isn't Boys to Men a dynasty league 8 years later?
There were a few things. I mean, again, it was a 14-team league, so you were limited on your trade partners because we and this was one thing that was discussed as we were setting up the league as well. Once you have a player on your roster, can you trade them? can I trade my rookie for that veteran? And ultimately we decided that kind of went against the spirit of the league. So you were limited to 6 other trade partners. And that was certainly one piece that limited the activity in general. Ultimately it came down to we were off on the ages, and certainly on the running backs. Most importantly, I think you mentioned the number at the age of 27 there. The young team, the boys teams, just ended up being pretty stacked. And I think we had 2 or 3 seasons of this. I believe you probably have a better memory of this than I do.
I'm pretty sure the boys won all 3 years. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. I couldn't remember if the men's side won in year 1 and then it went the other way, but I knew for sure.
Well, yeah. Ultimately, one of the huge things that we saw early on that we kind of saw in year 1, like, oh, this might not work, is that the men had okay starting lineups, and we did shallow lineups to account for the fact that of what we kind of knew what was happening. But the depth that the boys teams had was just unrelenting. And if a men team lost like one player to a bye week or one player to an injury, their season was done, even with the shallow lineups, because the boys just had that much depth. So I think that, the biggest issue being the age gap. We should have, lowered the ages probably for the running back, wide receiver positions. But talking a little bit about what we would do different if we were to restart this league in 2022. So I think that the biggest thing that I think could have made it better, other than the age gaps, is, so we've talked about before my league with no name leagues, where the auctions are based on divisions and conferences. Now, that's the only time the divisions and conferences matter, is during the specific auctions. Now, I think that if you allowed the boys teams to pick up men waiver wire, or men team to pick up boys waiver wire, and as well as allow trading between the two, I think that we would have a much better shot at lasting longer, because that opens you up from 6 trade partners to 13, but also that waiver wire is huge, and that can give that men team the depth that they so clearly needed.
Yeah, I totally agree with that for sure. I will say though, I felt like in this league, we were trying to prove a point, right? I mean, obviously you and I thought that building around young players worked better. Other teams, managers on the other side thought that that win now strategy with veterans would work better. And I mean, of course, the bottom line is we were right. That's really what matters. But no, but I do think that's why we decided not to allow trading. And even if we were to do this league again, and even talking about it kind of makes me want to give it another shot. I think there's other options that you could do to. I mean, obviously, you could make it a multiple copy league, and just double everything, or if you're crazy, you could even triple or quadruple everything. That would obviously give you more trade partners, put more teams on each side. I think that even though that trading rule limited things, I think I would still want that in place. And I mean, the one obvious thing that would change, not only because we were off in our math or just our decision making, but because the NFL has changed, would be those ages, right? I mean, I would say the running back age would probably be 25, maybe even 24 now. Wide receiver would probably would go down, certainly not as much, but it would drop as well.
All right, Ryan. So I think we've covered pretty in deep with boys to men. Is there anything else that, as you reflect on your time as commissioner of the league, that you think would be important if anybody wanted to try? You said you might want to try this concept again. If somebody want to try it themselves, other than the age thing, is there anything else that you think that is important to consider as you would enter that phase?
I mean, I would just go back to what I said at the beginning. Is anytime you have a unique league like this, and I've done a bunch of them, you've done a bunch of them as well, Nathan. And if you're watching this or listening to this, you probably are into those types of leagues. I call them prestige dynasty, by the way. I haven't gotten to roll that term out too much, but I used to say keeping dynasty weird, and that kind of had a negative connotation. So prestige dynasty is my new term for these weirdo leagues. But anyway, gather the input from your league mates. If you're welcoming people into your league and you're trusting them to be competitive in these prestige dynasty leagues, then trust them to give their input as well. And it obviously didn't totally work out in this league because it did only last 3 years. But I think that's a beneficial thing in general.
And also, this is something that you've talked about with Scott Fish on your podcast, Commission Impossible. You made the decision. You kind of made the decision for the group, but also like allowing it to like impact from the group or feedback from the group. You were like, "Hey guys, like I'm thinking about folding this. Like, what are your thoughts?" And I think probably like 9 out of 14 people immediately said like, "Yeah, let's just kill it." And so like getting the understanding the vibe of your league and understanding like, okay, who's going to be mad, who's going to be happy. Obviously, if you have a 14 team league, 14 people aren't going to be like, yeah, let's get rid of this unless it's a really bad league. But just understanding the league mates you have, and also just like not being afraid to kill something, to end a league if it's for the best of all parties.
Yeah, and I mean, again, I think ending the league was kind of a two-parter. One, as I said, both sides had a point to prove, and with 3 straight titles for the boys' side, I think we kind of saw how that went. And again, part of that is probably due to the age issue as well. It's not to say building with a young roster always works or anything like that. But so that was one piece of it. And then the second piece is we saw those things that needed to be changed for the good of the league. And honestly, we were just too far gone, right? Like changing the ages after 3 years just didn't make sense. And if there was enough interest, we could have totally scrapped it and restarted the league with updated ages and maybe changed a couple other things that stood out as problems. But it just wasn't necessary at that point.
Alrighty, that should wrap up our discussion on the Boys to Men Dynasty League. Make sure to tweet at Ryan McDowell, RyanMC23, and at MPLFF if you have any questions about how the Boys to Men went or anything, or any commissioner questions, really. We're always happy to answer them. And I'll make sure to tune into the Commissioner Chronicles on YouTube and Commission Impossible on your podcast apps. That wraps up for this week, and we will talk to you guys soon about another league that Ryan had that didn't last.